this afternoon that the reason for today's Farbrengen is because yesterday, Friday, was Yud Kislev. The Rebbe said it is not every Shabbos that we Farbrengen. A Farbrengen is made on a Shabbos when there's a special reason for it. The reason for the Farbrengen for this Shabbos is because yesterday was Yud Kislev, and that is the day when the Mittler Rebbe was released from prison. The Rebbe continued, Bichlal, in general, we notice the attitude of the Rabbeim is that a Farbrengen is always made on the evening after the date. For example, Yutes Kislev, we Farbreng on the night from Yutes to Chav. Purim, for example, the Rebbe says, previous Rabbeim would have a custom, they would start the Farbrengen Purim by day after Mincha and extend it into the night. The same when we're talking Rosh Hashanah, the Farbrengen, also it is begun while it is still Rosh Hashanah during the day, close towards the end of the day, and we also go into the night. So actually the same type of an approach should be with Yud Kislev. But, being that Yud Kislev was Friday, the Rebbe says Friday night, al pi halacha, there's a problem to start something Friday afternoon and go into Friday night. We run into halacha shaylas as far as Kiddush and so forth. So that is why the Farbrengen was postponed. Instead of having it last night, the Farbrengen is today. And the Rebbe stressed that there's a special closeness between Friday and Shabbos. It is not just that there are 2 days, one close to another. It is more than that. And Bichlal, we know that everything that transpires during the week has its aliyah, has its spiritual elevation on Shabbos. And then this includes the entire week, so it definitely includes the Friday as well. But the relation between Friday and Shabbos is a stronger one. Why? Because Friday and Shabbos, for example, if a person would accept Tosfos Shabbos, which means he would extend his Shabbos, he wants to begin his Shabbos earlier. So his Shabbos earlier will begin while it is still Friday. So here we have a very obvious way how Friday and Shabbos tie in very close to such an extent that if he accepts his Shabbos earlier, then we run into inyanim which are discussed in halacha of possibilities of saying Tviloi Shabbos davening, which is specific Shabbos davening, and he'll run into a possibility where he'll be able to recite it on Friday. So we see that Shabbos and Friday are really very close. So today's Farbrengen again is because yesterday, Friday, we had Yud Kislev. The greatness of a Farbrengen, the Rebbe says, is very obvious in the expression of the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe expressed himself, Piska min Shemaya Nochis, which means a note came down from heaven. The Pesach means a note, Piska in Aramaic. That what a Hasidische Farbrengen can accomplish, it is more than what Malach Machal accomplished. So the accomplishment of a Hasidische Farbrengen is really something very outstanding. The Rebbe continued right away that the accomplishments have to be brought down into deed, into Maisa. Ha-Maisa hu ha'ikar. The main thing what counts is Maisa. When we're talking about what should be the result of a Yud Kislev Farbrengen, Rabbi says the result of such a Farbrengen has to be something which is befitting to what Yud Kislev is all about. Rabbi says he spoke about it at previous occasions, by Yud Kislev Farbrengens, at Yud Beis Tammuz Farbrengens. For example, by Yud Beis Tammuz, it is not that they interfered with individuals learning themselves or fulfilling mitzvahs on an individual basis. What they really were against is that one should utilize his influence on somebody else. One should make a shiyah with somebody else. The same thing when we're talking about Yud Kislev. What was the whole union of Yud Kislev? Yud Kislev is the day when the Mittler Rebbe was released from prison. Why was he put into prison? What were they against? They were against the fact of spreading Chassidus. Spreading Chassidus to the extent having one Yid learn with somebody else. So it's not the idea that they were against individuals learning on their own Chassidus. The fact that Chassidus is being taught from one person to another, this is what they were trying to fight, and once we had Yud Kislev, we accomplished that, we succeeded this. Memela, when it comes now Yud Kislev, though normally we know that learning Torah is expressed through dibur, through speech, and here the Rebbe keeps on stressing that what's the main thing that counts? It is maaseh, ha-maaseh hu'ikar, deed, action, but b'negeya, one influencing somebody else to learn. In other words, when one learns with somebody else, here it is also an expression of mindset. It is not only an expression of dibur, it is also an expression of act and deed, because he's bringing somebody else to learn Chassidus together with him. When we are talking about the accomplishments, what do we have to derive from the Farbrengen of Yud Kislev? We have to, the lessons, the reflection in the deeds which we have to do have to be a response to what Yud Kislev is all about. And in Mela, it has to be in encouraging the learning of Chassidus and learning Chassidus with other people, and so forth. The Rebbe expressed himself further. Furthermore, the Rebbe said that Yud Kislev accomplished the entire thing of Farbrengens. In other words, they were against Chassidische Farbrengens. Once we have the celebration, we are celebrating Yud Kislev, this means that the idea of a Farbrengen, this in itself, to have a Chassidische Farbrengen, and a Chassidische Farbrengen definitely brings its results. This in itself is also an outcome of the accomplishment of the day of Yud Kislev. The Rebbe tied it into what we read in today's Sedra. We read that Yaakov came vayifgu by Malachei Elakim, he met the angels, and he met the angels, the Malachim, and Rashi comments that it was the Malachim of Eretz Yisrael as well as the Malachim of Chutz La'aretz. What is the Inyan of Eretz Yisrael? The famous story from the Tzemach Tzedek, that an individual once came to the Tzemach Tzedek and told him that he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael. He wants to move to Eretz Yisrael. So the Tzemach Tzedek told him, in Yiddish he expressed himself to him, Mach da Eretz Yisrael. Make Eretz Yisrael here. What does it mean? In other words, Eretz Yisrael has the spiritual explanation what it's all about. The idea of godliness that is revealed in Eretz Yisrael. So the Tzemach Tzedek told him, whatever the spiritual idea of Eretz Yisrael is, you do that over here, in that particular location where they were. What was the accomplishment of Yaakov Avinu? Is also the same idea. Expanding Eretz Yisrael, Machda Eretz Yisrael. In other words, Yaakov brought together on one spot the Malachim of Eretz Yisrael and the Malachim of Chutz La'aretz. So this reflects the same idea that he's taking the Inyan of Eretz Yisrael and Machda Eretz Yisrael. And this is what Yaakov was able to do even before Matan Torah. Now the Rebbe says that we are after Matan Torah. It is definitely that we have much more strength and much more koiches to be able to fulfill all of these inyan. Then the Rebbe continued in the second Sikha. Now we're talking about Yud Kislev and the greatness of Yud Kislev. But we all know that soon we're going to have Yutes Kislev. And it's explained in Sichas and all over that Yutes Kislev is considered the Chag HaChagim, a Yontev of Yontevs. In other words, Yutes Kislev is usually celebrated in a much broader way than Yud Kislev. So Mamela, one is going to say, if Yutes Kislev is going to be right away in another week or so, a little more than a week, we're going to have Yutes Kislev. So why are we making such a big issue with Yud Kislev? The time Yutes is celebrated in a much broader way, much bigger way, a much larger scale. Rabbi says, first of all, now we have Yud Kislev. And Yud Kislev is Achas Bashana, once a year. In other words, every Inyan, when it comes in its time in the year, we have to celebrate it when it comes. Because this Inyan we only have once. True, we will have Yutes Kislev, and it may be celebrated in a bigger way, but that's a separate Inyan. Yud Kislev is once a year. Now we have to celebrate Yud Kislev. Furthermore, I'll explain, what is the difference between the Mittel Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe? For the one who wants to see the difference between the two of them, the two Rabbeim, the Rebbe says the difference is a very obvious one. The difference is so obvious that if one is going to take a maimer from the Alter Rebbe, and one is going to take a maimer from the Mittler Rebbe, where the same inyanim are discussed, and he will find a tremendous difference. The Rebbe mentioned that there's a maimer re'ei that begins re'ei anoichi, and this maimer is from the Alter Rebbe, and there's also the same maimer re'ei anoichi neisen from the Mittler Rebbe. The Rebbe says we just came out of print recently. If we were to open the two Mamore, we will see that the Mittler Rebbe explains the same inyan which the Alter Rebbe explains. The Alter Rebbe explains it in a very brief way, extremely brief. The Mittler Rebbe explains it in a way the Rebbe uses the expression of Rechoyves HaNohor. What means Rechoyves HaNohor? Rechoyves HaNohor means in a very broad way. The Mittler Rebbe elaborates and explains an inyan very much ba'arichas. The Rebbe says that when an inyan is explained in a very broad way and explained very much in detail, we enjoy this inyan much more, and it may be the same inyan of both mamorim. And when we learn this inyan, we understand it much better, and we learn it much better. Why? Because it is explained in a much more detailed way, in a much broader way. And the Mela the Rebbe says this is the greatness, the accomplishment of the Mittler Rebbe upon the Alter Rebbe, because the Mittler Rebbe takes the same inyanim and explains it in a very, very clear and precise way, in a very lengthy way. I usually don't like to get off to other inyanim, just the ones I mean. Years ago, the Rebbe used to eat the Yontiv meals in the apartment of the Frierdiker Rebbe. As long as the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rebbetzin lived, the Rebbe used to eat all the Yontiv Sudas upstairs, that's on the second floor of 770. And many times during the Yontif meals, there were very interesting conversations where participants in the table would raise many questions, very interesting subjects, and the Rebbe would respond. It was once that Rashag, that's the Rebbe's brother-in-law, was heading to bring out a thought about the Rebbe Rashab, but the Rebbe Nishma Seid. And he was explaining the differences, how the Mamorim of all the Rabbeim are set up. And he said the Alter Rebbe is very brief. And then he says that in the Mittler Rebbe, that's what he says, the Mittler Rebbe explains everything in a very, very lengthy way. He was trying to hint like that the Mittler Rebbe is like there's a lot of double talk in the Mittler Rebbe's explanations. So the Rebbe interrupted him, and the Rebbe looked at him, and the Rebbe said that in Yiddish, that every word by the Mittler Rebbe, every word is extremely accurate. Though on one hand, he talks in a very lengthy way, and explains in Yonim as it may seem to us that it is extremely ba'arichas in a very long way. Rebbe said that every word in the Mittler Rebbe's Mamorim is extremely accurate. In fact, the Rebbe said today that the Mittler Rebbe himself, in the Hakdam, in the preface to one of his Svarim, writes that this is the difference between him and his father, that in the Alter Rebbe, that in Yonim, which the Alter Rebbe related in a very brief way, he himself relates in a very extended and arichas way of hasbara, of explanation. And the Rebbe added on, if a person is told that he's getting a gift, he's getting a gift of very precious stones and diamonds, and all he will have to do with them is bring them from the street where he's getting this gift into his private house. And when the same person is told that the gift which he's getting will be double the size, it's not going to be a smaller amount of diamonds, diamonds and precious stones. It'll be double the amount which he was just told that he's getting. So the person will definitely not hesitate, and he will definitely not show any dissatisfaction to the fact that he has to schlep something which is heavy and schlep it from the outside into the inside. He will be very happy because he's getting something which is extremely valuable. The same here when we're talking in the spiritual sense. We are told that we're getting something which is of yet greater value and yet greater weight. Why? Because the Inyanim are explained more ba'ariches. The Inyanim more at length. The Inyanim are explained more at length, but by having them in such a way, by all means can understand the Inyanim Chassidus, which the Mittel Rebbe is explaining in a much easier way, in a much geschmacker way in the Rebbe Yeredan. Then we learn the Inyanim with much more simcha, with much more happiness, because we understand the in-depth Inyanim which we are trying to learn in the Mamorim of the Mittel Rebbe. Here the Rebbe referred to an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe said that what we have to do now is we have to polish our buttons. In other words, it comes in continuation of an expression that everyone is a soldier in the Rebishter's army. And a soldier in the army has to wear a uniform. And the uniform of a soldier, everything has to be extremely accurate, to the extent that not only does the garment have to be clean and proper shape, but even the buttons on the garment also have to have the proper shine. They have to shine properly accordingly. So the Frierdiker Rebbe expressed himself that what we are doing now, everything is already perfect. We're almost ready for the coming of Mashiach. We're ready for him already. Mashiach is about to come. All we have to do is the final touch. What is the final touch? The final touch is the polishing of the buttons. The mundir means the uniform. The uniform which we soldiers are wearing in the spiritual sense should have the proper shine. May it on that by us, each deed which we do with somebody else, on whatever level only suitable, whether bringing somebody closer to Chassidus, or to Yiddishkeit, to Miftzayim, by all of these inyanim, this is reflecting on our buttons, that our buttons, the shine is becoming stronger. Our buttons are becoming shinier. The Rebbe continued, we're talking about buttons, and buttons to have a proper shine. Why? Because ein anius b'mokem ashiros. This is a Gemara. The Gemara gives us this rule, that in an area of wealth, there's no poverty. That is why the Gemara says that the behemoth, which was brought for a korban tamid, mashkin es ha-behemoths. Out of what vessels would the behemoths drink? The behemoths would drink from clay kesef, they would drink from a golden dish. Silver dish. Why? Because this would be for a behemoth which is going to be brought for the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe says the behemoth is not, it's not that the behemoth is in the process of a korban. The behemoth is not being, it's a behemoth which within a few days, this behemoth will be used as a korban tamid. So still we see how far it goes, that this behemoth, a few days before it's being used, once it was already designated to be a korban, it has to be treated in a royal way so that it is suitable for the Beis HaMikdash. Beis HaMikdash is considered mokem ashiros, an area of wealth. And ein anius b'mokem ashiros, there is no poverty where there is wealth. I'll get back to you. The Mela the Rebbe says, the same is when we're talking in the spiritual sense. What is the idea of giving the behemoths to drink? Why was the korban fed with an excessive amount of water? So the Gemara says that the reason for it is to remove the sirches. There's a sirche which is on the lungs. Sirche is on the reya, on the lung. That is an area which is not smooth. It's negeh in kashrus. It's also negeh. That's what makes a behemoth glatt kosher, or not glatt kosher. Glatt means that the lungs are smooth. There's no sircha there. There's nothing which disturbs us from going across it in an even way, in a smooth way. If they're smooth, that's called glatt. It's the little translation of glatt. That's where the whole concept of glatt kosher stems from. The Mela, in order that there shouldn't be any reyes, any sirches on the lungs, to wipe off the sirches, that is why an excessive amount of drinking would be helpful for that. That's what the Gemara says. Mela, when we're talking in the spiritual sense, the Rebbe says, what is the whole idea of a reya? The idea of a reya, the lungs, in order for us to be able to breathe properly, the breathing is functioning through the lungs. Mela, in order for a yid to be able to serve the Rebishter properly, he has to be able to breathe properly. However, there are what means behemoth, mashkin es ha-behemoth. Behemoth means the nefesh ha-behemoth, the Yetzer Hara that's within it. The Yetzer Hara within the person is interfering a yid to serve the Rebishter. What are we told here? We are told that the Yetzer Hara is being fed out of special luxurious kelim. Why? It means in the spiritual sense. The Rebbe means that the Rebbe should take care and give a yid whatever he needs, all his gashmis. All his gashmias to the fullest extent. Memela, this will wipe out all the sirchos, all the interferences from the Nefesh HaBahamis. Memela, so the Nefesh HaBahamis would not interfere with a yid to serve the Rebishter. And this, because the serving the Rebishter, that's our source of life, that's our breath. What's the breath of a yid? His existence, his total existence is when he can serve the Rebishter. The Rebishter gives us the Lebedigkeit, and Memela, by us being associated with him, this is our source of Lebedigkeit. By being able to remove the sirches, that is what interferes within the lungs to be able to breathe properly. Memela, in the spiritual sense, the Rebbe says it's also the same. Mashkenes HaBehemis, the Behemis, the Nefesh HaBahamis, is being fed out of special kelim. In other words, the Rebbe is treating a yid to whatever he needs, so that the Nefesh HaBahamis should not interfere with a yid when it comes to serve the Rebbe. The Rebbe concluded this Sikha with the Sedra which we began to read today to Mincha. Today we are beginning to read to Mincha Vayishlach Yankov Malachim, that Yaakov sent messages al Esav Achir. In other words, what does this mean? That Yaakov is already ready to go out of Golus, and he's sending this notification to Esav that he's ready to inherit Har Seir. It's brought in Svarim that when Mashiach will come, Har Seir la Reshes Esav, Yidden are going to Yarshin, are going to inherit the Seir, which is the territory of Esav. So this is the message which we are notifying Esav, that Yidden Mitzados, we are ready for the coming of Mashiach. And Mashiach could come and should come, and we are ready to get out of Golus, and we are ready to inherit all the additions which the Rebishter will give us when he will take us out of this Golus and will give us the additional parts to Eretz Yisrael. The Farbrengen, the Rebbe also mentioned that being that Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week, and next Sunday is Yutes Kislev. So Memela, Shabbos, by giving bracha to the entire week, during this week we have to make all the preparations for proper Yutes Kislev Farbrengens. So the Rebbe alerted everyone and brought to our attention that proper preparation should be made to have proper celebrations of Yutes Kislev all over. In fact, the Rebbe added on that for those who are here this Shabbos and will not be here Yutes Kislev, and they will be elsewhere and being involved in celebrating Yutes Kislev and making Yutes Kislev Farbrengens, he will give mashke from this Farbrengen, from today's Farbrengen, and the mashke will be in his office, in Secretariat to the Rebbe, where whoever is traveling to another area to spend Yutes Kislev will be able to get some of the mashke to take it along there, and this will be the Rebbe's participation in that Yutes Kislev Farbrengen. As it's customary in the Farbrengens that the Rebbe discusses a Rashi in this week's Sedra, and as it was instituted recently that the Rebbe, upon the request of the Rebbe, that in the various periodicals which are published, questions are asked in the yeshivas, the Torah and the Maristown, and as the Rebbe mentioned, we will get to it soon, even in Eretz Yisrael. Questions are raised in the week Sedra of Rashi. Thank you. And the Rebbe usually would pick one of the questions and discuss it in the Farbrengen. The Rebbe says it's a very strange thing. When he suggested it, then everybody began asking the questions. But what he's getting is only questions. Why doesn't anybody think to answer a question also? Why only kashas? Why not an answer? Just because he didn't bring it to our attention, that's no reason that there shouldn't be answers also. Especially the Rebbe says the participants in writing in all of these periodicals are participants on different levels. And in Mele, there are certain things which to one person may be a question. However, to somebody who is on a higher level, he's in the position of answering the question. Especially the Rebbe says the editors, those who are in charge and publishing the publication, it is their obligation that when they see questions which could be answered, why shouldn't they answer the question? Then the Rebbe went back also to an inyan which was discussed last week, rather 2 weeks ago in the Farbrengen, and that is the Rashi that deals with the trip of Eliezer to Rivka. That So Rashi tells us that when Eliezer went to Rivka, Koftzolei Haderech, he had Kvitzas Haderech. In other words, a trip which normally should take longer. In fact, the Rebbe says the Medrash tells us how long that trip should take. The trip should take 17 days. And Eliezer made it in one day. As Rashi tells us, based on the pasuk, Hayoim Yotzasi v'Hayoim Basi. It is today that he left and today that he arrived. He left Avram's house on that day and he arrived to Rivka on the same day, which is an extraordinary ness. So first of all, we know that the Rebbe does not make any ness unless there's a reason for it. So the question arises, what was the reason of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to make such a miracle, to rush the trip of Eliezer? Could have taken 17 days longer. Furthermore, question arises, if there was a need to rush his trip for whatever reason, so why wasn't his trip rushed back? So he should have had the same miracle on his way back when he took along Rivka. He also should have had Kvitzas Haderech. Why didn't he have Kvitzas Haderech then? Rashi only mentions that the Kvitzas Haderech was when he went to Rivka, not when he went back with Rivka to the house of Avram and Yitzchak. And here the Rebbe also expressed disappointment why nobody really searched for a response to this question which he raised 2 weeks ago. And on one hand, the Rebbe says there's a Gemara. The Gemara says that if somebody is involved in something for 5 years and does not see any success in it, then he should stop doing it. The Rebbe says he's for years that he's reminding and begging that we should be involved in all of these things, and he's not seeing the proper results. Then he says perhaps he should think to find a response that there's a Gemara, Kol mi sheyesh bo yirah shamayim, dvarav nishmai. One who is a God-fearing person, people listen to his words. He's understood what he wanted to say, and he's not getting response. But again, what he really was heading towards is that he wants us really to be involved in the inyanim which the Rebbe talks about, and when a question is raised, to begin searching for an answer. He says, he's been talking about Asei L'Charav, so probably you have a Rav, or at least, as he expressed himself, or at least you have a Rav on paper, whom you have chosen, or you filled out a zettel that you have a Rav. Memele, the Rebbe says, why didn't your Rav tell you where to look and find an answer to this question? The Rebbe referred to a Chumash Torah Shleima. Torah Shleima is something which was prepared recently by a Rav who lived in Eretz Yisrael. He passed away, Harav Kasha. And Torah Shleima means it's a gathering of Midrashim on Psukim. And in Torah Shleima, there he brings that Eliezer, on the way back, also had Kvitzas Haderech. So Rebbe says, the reason Rashi doesn't bring it is because in the realm of Pshuti Shel Mikra, Rashi does not have what pasuk to base it on that he had Kvitzas Haderech on the way back also. Because Rashi is basing it on the pasuk. Rashi is limited to Pshuti Shel Mikra. But in fact, we take a find, like the Medrash tells us, that Eliezer had Kvitzas Haderech also on the way back. Why Taka did he? What was the rush? Rabbi added on because he had an interest in getting Rivka to Yitzchak immediately when she will turn 3. That immediately upon her turning 3 years old, she will already be by Yitzchak. So for this reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the ness of Kvitzas Haderech on the trip of Eliezer to Rivka, as well as Kvitzas Haderech on the trip of Eliezer back from Rivka back to Yitzchak. Getting into this week's Seder, the Rebbe says there are a few questions which are discussed. And this is the way the Rebbe held Rashi holds? I don't know if he holds Rashi. Rashi holds that way in the Inyan. But in Pshuti, Rashi can't bring it because he has no pasuk to base it on.
Does that answer the Rebbe's question that he had already basically asked? This Torah Shleima answers the Rebbe's...
It's a medrash. Torah Shleima brings the medrash. At least we find a source that there was Taki Kvitzas Haderech on the way back, right? Now getting into this week's Rashi, Rebbe discussed a few inyanim. Firstly, at the beginning of the Sedre, where Rashi brings Vayifga b'mokoim. Yaakov left Beersheva and was going to Choron. And the pasuk says, Vayifga b'mokoim. And Rashi explains what spot did he come across. Where is this mokoim? Rashi continues another Rashi, a separate Rashi, Vayivga. And Rashi touches up what is the source of the word Vayivga, the exact taich, what does Vayivga mean? So first of all, the question was raised, if Rashi is trying to taich up where this place was, what is the place which Yaakov came across upon leaving Beersheva, why does Rashi also have to quote the word Vayivga? Obviously, Rashi is touching up only Mokim. What is the Mokim? What is the place? So why does Rashi also quote the word Vayivga? Then we notice that there's a separate Rashi. There's a separate Rashi of Vayivga. So here the Rebbe says, why is it broken up into two Rashis? So initially he wanted to say that we find that at times that when Rashi has to explain the Inyan, and Rashi explains only the Taich, so it's broken up into two Rashis. However, the question is then, what does Rashi explain first and what does he explain second? Does he first Taich up the exact meaning of the word? Or does he first explain the idea in the Pasuk? For example, over here, the first Rashi, Vayivga B'Mokim, explains the idea. What is the place? Where is the place that Yaakov came across? And Rashi tells us that what is the place? It's Har HaMoriah, it's the future place where the Beis HaMikdash would be built. Then we have a second Rashi. The second Rashi is Vayivga, touching up the word Vayivga. Rashi brings Rayas, excuse me, what Vayivga means. So the question arises, when does Rashi put it in what type of system that he touches up first the idea and then the word? And above all, the question is, why does Rashi also quote the word Vayivga?
And the order.
And the order.
If he didn't Makom, if he's doing Makom,
and if Rashi should have quoted only Makom, then he should have done Vayivga first, touching the word first. Right? So the Rebbe learns very simple here. The Rebbe says, it's a very simple explanation. Yaakov is leaving Beersheva, and he's going Charana. So if we look back in Rashi, he hasn't arrived to Charan yet. He's heading towards Charan. That's what Rashi says. Vayela Charana, Yotza Lalechas Lecharan. It means his destination was Charan. So where is Yaakov actually? Yaakov is on the outside of Beersheva. That is where he is. Yaakov on the outside of Beersheva, what is this Mokim that he's finding? The Rebbe says that there is other Mefarshim that learn, that we find, Rashi learns that what is meant Mokim, Har HaMoriah is referred to Mokim, Shenema Vayaras HaMokim Erochik. So we see that Har HaMoriah is referred to as Mokim. The other Mefarshim that raise questions, that we find other areas that are referred to as Mokim. Chevron is referred to as Mokim, we find in the Psukim, and we find other areas that are referred to as Mokim. And above all, the question arises, Yaakov is leaving Beersheva. Is then Har HaMoriah on the outskirts of Beersheva? Har HaMoriah is much further. So, what's going on here? The Pasuk is telling us Yaakov is leaving Beersheva. He hasn't arrived to Charan yet. He's heading towards Charan. That's how Rashi is learning. And immediately we're continuing. Vayivga b'Mokim. The Rebbe says, it seems to him that it is. In other words, he would say that perhaps it is all one Rashi. The Vayivga b'Mokim and the Vayivga, it's really all one Rashi, which is broken up into two Rashis by the printers. But it is really one Rashi, because in the latter part of the Rashi, the second Rashi actually, in Vayivga, Rashi is telling us that Yaakov had Kfitzas HaDerech. So being that Yaakov had Kfitzas HaDerech, so he left Beersheva. Har HaMoriah, which is the area of the Beis HaMikdash, is taking quite a distance from Beersheva. How did Yaakov come to Beersheva immediately? Because he had Kfitzas HaDerech. So this is there's one Rashi, Vayivga b'Mokim, he came to the spot. In other words, Rashi must quote the word Vayivga also. Rashi can't just quote b'Mokim the spot and explain us what the spot is, because it's Negei Vayivga b'Mokim. He arrived at the spot, which is what Vayivga means. He arrived at the spot. How did he arrive at the spot so fast? He just left Beersheva. How is he just there? And what is meant by Vayivga b'Mokim? It is meant that he came to the area of Har HaMoriah. How did he get there so fast? So here we have the second half of the Rashi. What is the second half of the Rashi telling us? Because he had Kfitzas HaDerech, he was able to get there that fast. Another inyan which the Rebbe discussed is He asked questions, he didn't answer them, regarding when Lavan met Yaakov. So Lavan is meeting Yaakov, and the pasuk says, "Vayechabek loi, vayinashek loi." He hugged him and he kissed him. And as Rashi tells us that he thought that he came with more wealth even than Eliezer came, because if Eliezer, who was a servant to Yaakov's grandfather, Avraham, came with so much wealth, so when Yaakov, who's an Einikol of Avraham, himself is arriving, he's definitely arriving with a big, vast treasure. But he was disappointed. So Rashi tells us, "Vayechabek loi, vayinashek loi." The pasuk says, "Vayechabek loi, vayinashek loi." He hugged him and he kissed him. So Rashi explains at length, he hugged him and kissed him, because by that way he tried searching, maybe he has something on him, maybe he has something in his mouth. He was looking, maybe he has some precious stones, some precious diamonds. If we look into the pasuk, which is in Kapitel Chof Tes, pasuk Yud Gimel, we will notice Rashi quotes the word Vayechabek, does not quote the word loi. Pasuk says Vayechabek loi. Rashi doesn't. Comes to the next word in the pasuk, Vayinashek loi, he kissed him. So Rashi is explaining the concept why he kissed him. Here Rashi does quote the word loi, him. So Mamanishach. Why by Vayechabek? Rashi does not quote it. If he doesn't quote it by Vayechabek, then he shouldn't quote it by Vayinashek either. If he does quote it by Vayinashek, then he should at least quote it by Vayechabek also. So there must be a reason why Rashi does quote the Vayinashek loi, the word loi, when it talks about Lavan's kissing Yaakov, and does not quote the word loi when he hugged Yaakov, which the Rebbe left unanswered. Then the Rebbe explained the Rashi about the birth of Yosef. When Rachel gave birth to Yosef, pasuk says, she said, "Osaf Elokim eschar posi." Hashem has gathered my shame. That is in Kapitel Lamed Pasuk Chav Gimel. Thank you. Between Revi and Chamishi, it's after Revi. What does it mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu gathered her shame. So Rashi explains, Hichnisa v'mokim shaloi tira. He put the shame away in a place where it can't be seen. And Rashi brings rayas. So Rashi brings 4 rayas on this concept. So the question which was raised by Na'aras Hatmimim is, why does Rashi have to bring 4 rayas, 4 proofs to explain the word of Osaf Hashem eschar posi, that Hashem has gathered her shame? The Rebbe says this is a question which deserves to be looked into. But he says what he doesn't understand, what the Rebbe doesn't understand in this Rashi, is a yet bigger question. What does it mean? What is the pshat her shame? What was going on? What was going on here was as follows. Leah was a mother of 6 children. Both of the maids, Bila and Zilpah, had 2 shvatim each. And Rachel didn't have anybody. So she was totally broken. What did the Rebishter do? The Rebishter blessed her with a child. The Rebishter blessed her with a child. So she's saying, Osaf Hashem eschar posi. Osaf Elokim eschar posi. The Rebishter has gathered her charpa, her shame. What does Rashi say? What did Hashem do? He put it in a place where it can't be seen. What does it mean? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to take away her shame, let her take it away totally. Let him take it away totally. What's the pshat? HaKadosh Baruch Hu swept it away, swept it under the carpet in a place where it can't be seen. If he wants to make Rachel feel good, that she shouldn't have no shame anymore, due to the fact that the other women in the house are all blessed with children. She is not blessed with children. But she had her shame because of that. What does Rashi say? What did the Rebishter do? The Rebishter put it away in a place where it can't be seen. Let him destroy it altogether. What are we gaining? It's still in existence, but it can't be seen. A very, very geschmack teretz. Rebbe says as follows. She felt bad for the fact that she didn't have children. Now the Rebishter gave her a child. Naturally, this didn't satisfy her. Because as the pasuk goes on saying, Vatikra Shema Yosef, why did she call him Yosef? Lamer, to say, Yosef Hashem li bein acher. She wanted to have another child. She wasn't happy with just one child. True. But on the other hand, what was accomplished by her having this one child? Osaf Elokim eschar posi. Her shame from not having children. Her walking in the street without a child, which this broke her. This HaKadosh Baruch Hu put away in a place where it's not seen. What does it mean? The Bible says when a woman walks in the street with one child, nobody goes asking questions, where are her other 6 children? Maybe she has 6 children. Maybe she has altogether 12 children. Nobody raises such type of questions. She left them home. They're in school. They're by friends. They're elsewhere. As long as she's able to walk in the street with holding on to a child holding on to her, this is already, everybody sees that she's a mother of children. Memela, she does not have any charpa anymore. The question, how many children? Does she have one child only, or does she have more children? This, the Rebbe says, this question does not, people are not troubled with that, as long as they see her walking in the street with a child. She was take, not happy. She wanted to have more children, as the pasuk right away goes on telling us. Why did she call him Yosef? She asked for another child. However, her charpa, her shame of not being able to walk in the street with a child because she didn't have no children until then, this HaKadosh Baruch Hu put away b'mokim sheloi tireh. It was put away in an area where it's unseen anymore. Why is it unseen anymore? Because I just said, whoever sees her walking with a child is not going to be in questioning. Rachel has 1 child, Leah has 6. Or Rachel has 1 child, and the Shvachos, Bila and Zilpa, each of them have 2. This is something which is not going to trouble the people. Why? Because nobody cares. Nobody goes, counting that far and looking so far behind into somebody's private affair. As long people have an attitude of commenting when they see a woman walking in a child in the street. If the woman is not holding on to any children, but this woman has no children. Once we see her walking with a child, people don't go making calculations. Is it this 1 child that she has? Or maybe she has somebody older, somebody younger. People don't pay attention to that. But that's the pshat in the words. Hichnisa HaKadosh Baruch Hu took her shame and put it b'mokim sheloi tireh. It's not seen anymore. Satisfied, Shitaka wasn't. As the pasuk goes on right away and saying, Vatikra Shema Yosef, Leima Yosef Hashem li bein achem. However, at the same time, her charpa, her busha, her embarrassment, what she had for walking in the street without a child, this was hidden, this was put aside. Rebbe says, as he's been talking lately, to look for an indication in the Sedre for the Inyan of a Chabad house, of a Beis Chabad. Rebbe says, in this Sedre, there's a very obvious one. Yaakov saying, "V'even hazois asher samti matzeiva yiyeh beis Elokim." What is the Inyan of Beis Elokim? A Beis Elokim means a Chabad house. Rebbe went into an in-depth explanation. He tied it in with a Zayah, which he explained in this week's Sedre. All based on this pasuk, a Zayah which explains the pasuk. One explanation from Rabbi Eliezer, another one from Rabbi Shimon, but was constantly stressing the idea that the Beis Elokim and the pasuk means a Chabad house. It's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe also learns a Rambam, has a shaykhs to the daily shir of Rambam. Today we finished the halachas of shchenim, the halachas of neighbors. In the halachas of shchenim, there's a concept of bar metzra. Bar metzra means a neighbor. Was meint das? Means, in general, if I own a house, and or property, and I'm about to sell the property, the priority on buying this property is given to the neighbor. If the neighbor does not want it, or the neighbor refuses, then we can go out and put it on the open market. That's the halacha of bar metzvah. And as the Rebbe stressed that in the halachas of bar metzvah, we will see in the Rambam, there are certain inyonim, certain obligations which we are obligated to do so because of midas chassidus. In other words, it's not a real halachic requirement, but if we want to act according to chassidus, then we should do it. There is stronger requirement based on the pasuk v'asisa hayosha v'hatoiv. The pasuk tells us that we are supposed to do what is good and righteous. Based on v'asisa hayosha v'hatoiv, this is already more applicable to everybody. Midas Sidus, one could say he doesn't want to act according to Midas Sidus. But Asisa Yoshev HaTov, this is a pasuk which is commanded to every Yid, that everyone has to act on the Asisa Yoshev HaTov. And this is what the dinim of Bar Metzra are based on, doing what is good and what is righteous. Then the Rambam tells us in the last halacha of Hilchos Shcheina. Rambam tells us as follows: Im hoya echad mi yoshvei ha'ir. There was a shochem for Talmud Chacham koidem. If it's a question of a shochem and a Talmud Chacham, the Talmud Chacham comes first. Karev a Talmud Chacham, a neighbor and a Talmud Chacham koidem, the Talmud Chacham is first. Karev is a relative. So, Karev is a relative and the Talmud Chacham is koidem. Shochem v'karev, a shochem and a relative, a neighbor and a relative. Ha-shochem koidem, the shochem is prior. Shagam zeh bechlal ha-toiv ha-yosha, because this is also considered toiv and yosha. Now the question arises if there's an Amma Oretz and a Talmud Chacham. Rabbi says, obviously, if there's an Amma Oretz and a Talmud Chacham, question arises, who gets it first? So there is a halacha, the Rambam tells us, if the neighbor is a goy, then the halacha of Bar Metzra falls off. We don't have to give priority to a goy. What's the logic behind it? Rabbi learns what's the logic behind not giving priority to a goy, because the idea is not just to be a neighbor. You have to have a neighbor who you will have good terms with. And if it's a goy who you are afraid that will cause you tzaras, will cause you problems, then you're not supposed to turn it over to the goy. The Rabbi says, what is the main difference between an Amoritz and a Talmud Chacham? As the Rambam himself explains elsewhere, an Amoritz is not an oimid b'diburoi. He says something, doesn't live up to his words. Talmud Chacham, it's not just the fact that one knows how to learn, the other one doesn't know how to learn. The ethics of a Talmud Chacham are not the ethics of an Amoritz. Mele, when we're talking in the halachas of Bar Metzra, and it's a question whom we should give priority to. If we should give priority to a Talmud Chacham, or we should give priority to an Amoritz, and the halacha is that we don't have to give priority to the Talmud Chacham. So the Rebbe asks, why? It's not just the fact that he knows how to learn, and the one that's an Amoritz, he doesn't know how to learn. It's definitely better having a neighbor who's an Oimid B'diburoi, who listens, who lives up to what he promises, lives up to what he says. His entire attitude is a different one. So we have to understand the Rambam. Once the Rambam gives us, he says that everything, the Rambam himself says that everything has to be clearly understood, and the Rambam himself says that Torah has, Rambam says in Hilchos Tmura, which the Rebbe refers to very often, that all in Yonim of Torah are liyasher, are to straighten us out. All in Yonim of Torah are to have an effect on those who fulfilled in Yonim of Torah. And mainly here we are talking about such a case. It's a question of giving preference to the Amoritz, or giving preference to the Talmud Chacham. Definitely we should give preference to the Talmud Chacham, not just because the fact that Talmud Chacham knows how to learn better and the Amoritz doesn't. The Talmud Chacham acts different, and when we're looking for neighbors, what is usually our concern when we're looking for neighbors? When we're looking for neighbors, our concern is we should have fine people, honest people as neighbors. The Talmud Chacham is considered an honest person. The Amoritz is a person who is not an honest person. So therefore, by far, our interest should definitely be to have not the Amoritz as a neighbor, and rather have the Talmud Chacham as a neighbor. The Rebbe concluded this with an open question, and the Rebbe has an expression when he leaves questions open. He says, Kein lechacham vayechkam oid. Leave it up to the chacham, to the bright person. Vayechkam oid, he will become yet brighter. In other words, let him go and search and look for a teretz, and his chachma will grow. Afterwards, the Rebbe said to sing a nigun of the Mittler Rebbe, to sing the Alter Rebbe's nigun, and then we will prepare for Mincha and Kriyas HaTorah, as the Rebbe expressed himself, on alle gute Sachen, and all other good things. And after reminding everyone to make a bracha achrona, the Rebbe again reminded us, being that Yutas Kislev is coming up, that everybody should see to it wherever they can arrange for Yutas Kislev Farbrengen. Yutas Kislev is next Sunday, a week from tomorrow. wherever Yitas Kislev Farbrengen can be arranged, everybody should try and put efforts into it and arrange Yitas Kislev Farbrengens all over and try to participate in them. A gute Woche.